Good evening and welcome to Writers on Writing. I am your host, Dr. Brenda Greene, and this program is paid for by Medgar Evers College. Writers on Writing comes to you every Sunday and gives you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their life, and their craft. And we also are on YouTube, so I encourage you to visit the Center for Black Literature YouTube page, and that is posted right after the interview on radio. That's www.centerforblackLiterature.org. And in case I forgot to mention, I am the executive director and founder of the Center for Black Literature and director of the National Black Writers Conference, as well as professor of English here at Medgar Evers College. So I am very, very excited and pleased to have with me a prolific writer, Victor LaValle.
It's so
Welcome,
good to be.
Victor. Yes,
Sorry.
yes.
It's so good to be here, Doctor. I was so excited. I jumped
Okay.
in.
I'm so excited to have you. Victor LaValle has been with us before. He's been a workshop leader for our writers retreat. He has appeared at our National Black Writers Conference. He is the author of 8 works of fiction, which include 5 novels, a collection of short stories, and he's written 2 graphic novel series. His novels have been included in Best of the Year lists by the New York Times, Book Review, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, The Nation, and Publishers Weekly. And his most recent book, very interesting title, called Lone Woman. Lone Woman. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So, Victor, Lone Woman. That
Yes.
title captivated me. So what was the motivation behind writing Lone Women?
Well, the heart of it was, first, I'm so happy to be here talking with you. So I'm a New York native, born and raised in Queens. I write a lot about New York. Almost all of my previous books are set in New York. The book I wrote before this one was a novel called The Changeling that was very, very New York centered. It was a love letter to New York, but when I was done with it, I was pretty sick of New York. And I was looking for something else to read about, write about, and I did a reading at the University of Montana. Must be more than a decade ago now. And after the reading, I went to the the university bookstore rather, and I looked for their local history section because I just figured I wasn't there that long. I'd love to learn about the place where I've been. And one book jumped off the shelf at me, and it was called A Field of One's Own, Lone Woman Homesteaders in Montana, by Dr. Sarah Carter. And the book was a history of lone women, a group of women, which means women who came out to Montana to homestead, who did not have anyone else, no man to co-sign, is
Yes.
essentially the heart of it. And that the laws at that time allowed for that was surprising to me and interesting to me. And then what was even more interesting to me was when I discovered that those laws extended to not just white women, that Black women could homestead, Mexican women of Mexican descent could homestead. But then it was interesting to see, but indigenous women could not at the time, and Chinese
Yes.
women could not because of the Chinese Exclusion Act of the period. And so all of this was new to me. I said, well, I'm this kid from New York. Maybe everyone out here knows the lone women, and it's just me who's ignorant. But when I asked them, people who either had been born and raised in the state or people who had come there for work, have you ever heard of these lone women? Every single one of them said they never had. And so I was like, well, if even you don't know about them, then maybe I can tell a story.
Okay. And it is a fascinating story. And of course, you have included and written, I should say, in the genre of speculative fiction for your last novel. So why speculative fiction?
Well, so what I love, I really love a good monster, right? And I love a good monster because it's fun. Myself, my mom, and my sister, our favorite genre of movies to watch together is horror movies good ones, bad ones, doesn't matter. We put them on and they just kind of play in the background. We all watch together. Half the time we're laughing at whatever's going on in the movie. But the other half we're pretty scared, but it still is like a bonding thing. So I really came to love monsters in that way. But as I got older, what I came to realize is monsters are a great way to talk about a very serious subject without necessarily having to name the subject directly. So the most famous example I usually use is Frankenstein,
Yes.
right? Frankenstein is a way to talk about the hubris of men when it comes to science, the desire to do God's job, right? And then if you think about also, it's about a father who abandons his child, and his child becomes a vicious monster as a result. So it's all these big ideas, but by putting it inside a story about a dead body that is brought back to life, it gets to be both fun and fantastic and wrestle with big serious ideas. And so that has always stayed with me as like one of the ways um, to do that. And certainly within the Black American tradition, writers like Gloria Naylor, Toni Morrison have certainly made use of, I mean, they're not called speculative fiction, I guess, because they're just giants of their field, but ghosts in particular are powerful, powerful
Right.
ideas, in both those authors, among many others.
Right.
And I think it's because they want to talk about something really heavy, but sometimes to do that, you need something that's almost unreal or impossible in order to get at how
Mhm.
big and powerful the subject is.
Well, Black people have been writing speculative fiction, as you said, for years, and it's in so many novels when you think about
That's
the
right.
ancient traditions, the rituals, the hauntings, the ghosts.
That's
So,
right.
so bringing all of that in is something that, I think about Toni Morrison,
Hmm.
you
For
know,
sure.
definitely the ghosts. So just share with our readers just a very brief synopsis of the story without giving it
Too much
away.
away. Yes. So the basic idea is that the main character of the story is a woman named Adelaide Henry. She's 30 years old. She's lived on her family farm with her mother and father her entire life in Southern California, where they have been homesteading there. And at the very beginning of the novel, we see her. This isn't spoiling anything, I think. We see her burning down her family farm.
Yes.
And when she flees the burning house, all she takes with her is a very large steamer trunk with a big, big lock on it. And the reason it has a big lock on it is because anytime she opens that trunk, people seem to die. And
Okay, we're gonna stop
she
there.
will stop there. She and her trunk travel to Montana,
Yes, they travel. Yeah.
and the story goes from there.
Yes, she has many, many secrets.
Yes,
Many,
yes.
many secrets. So one of the interesting things I found is that you are referencing some literary figures, in the novel, and some themes. You want to talk about it, why you did that? Was that very conscious? And I
Mm.
keep thinking about um the I'm thinking more about the ghost, but Zora Neale Hurston.
For sure.
Yeah. So
Yes. Well, so on the thematic side of things,
woman is a mule.
A Woman is a Mule. Yes,
Yes.
that was definitely a Zora Neale Hurston
Mhm.
nod reference. And I mean, I think Zora Neale Hurston, like one of the powerful things about her is the ways that she wrote across so many genres, right? Like in her fiction, but also her nonfiction, and the way she talks about like voodoo and things like that, like reports on that, um, and takes it very seriously as a system of belief, but also a way of living, a way of passing down traditions, all the rest. Um, so I wanted to make reference to her for that reason, as you said, as a nod to the certainly the idea that nothing I'm doing is brand new, that it is part of a long chain of Black storytelling in particular, right? And then on a thematic level, at the heart of the book is the idea of shame, right? And the idea of family shame. Um,
Yes.
and the I guess if I'm being totally honest, that mattered to me because I grew up in a family that was guarded its secrets very closely, right? Maybe most families do, but it was the kind of family where it was like you never,
Never tell your family
you never
business.
tell your family business, but also even like you don't even bring people over to the home
Mhm.
because people will be nosy, people will see things, and in my family's case, the thing we were sort of wrestling with was mental illness. We have a number of family members who have suffered with degrees of neurodivergence
Right.
or mental illness, um, but it was we I was taught that that was a secret we were all meant to keep, right? We were not meant to ever acknowledge if a family member acted strangely.
Mhm.
We certainly were never meant to acknowledge it, like if a neighbor brought it up or anything like that. I mean, most of them never would, but we weren't even allowed to discuss it, kind of thing. And the thing by the age when I was working on Lone Women, by the time I was a grown man with my own family, um, the thing I'd come to understand was that everybody knew our secret. Like we weren't hiding it from anyone.
Right.
That one of the powerful things about shame and like family secrets is the only people it traps is the
The
family,
the family, right.
right? And in a way, it's designed to do that um, because you have to keep everyone else out and keep your family members sort of trapped inside the walls. Otherwise, you have no one to sort of share your shame with. You have no one to talk with. But like when I got older, when I would link up again with kids I grew up with, and they were all like, "Oh, we knew your family was messed up. We knew all these
Right.
things were going on."
Right.
And I would be like, "How did you know?" And they said, "The cops were in front of your house. They were being called like 3 times a week. And this family member and that family member were yelling at each other so loud, we heard you 3 floors up." And I would just be like, "Oh,
Wow.
I thought we were doing such a good job." And everyone was like, "No, the only people you were fooling were yourselves."
Right.
And that really stayed with me. Um,
That
and
definitely
so
permeates your your
yeah,
other novels also.
it is a huge theme. It is a huge theme. I'm trying to work through, I mean, I guess maybe they say many writers have just like one or two themes that they're constantly sort of working over. And that's definitely one of mine.
Right. And then of course, you set the tone with the quote from Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. You want to
Yes,
fly, you got to give up the S that weighs you down.
that's it.
It's just, how do you liberate yourself? How do you free yourself from
That's right.
all of that baggage?
That's right. And even like I even wanted to use that quote also because I'm again no spoilers, but that is a story about a person who flies. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
I wanted that to be even right from the beginning a little bit of a hint that like there would be strange things in this book. Like if you knew Song of Solomon, you'd be like, okay, maybe things might be a little topsy-turvy sometimes.
Right. Right. So just going back to the whole research process, because as I read it, I thought about you just bringing up the whole Native American
Mhm.
situation, as you said, the way Chinese were treated, the whole migrating, the sexism, the racism. I mean, what was the research process that you went through? And I had a sense that, I mean, I think one of your references referenced a book just on Black female homesteaders.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, so will you excuse me? I'm going to just turn around on my shelf and just grab my research
Okay.
pile just to show you. So what happened was I read that first book, that Field of One's Own, and from there I just got sort of lost in the. I wasn't even thinking I was necessarily planning a book, but I got lost in just the research. Just like learning more about this time and place that was completely foreign to me. So one of them was it's called African American Women Confront the West, 1600 to 2000. And so the idea, just that alone, it shouldn't be mind blowing to think of 400 years of Black women in the West, but yet it is,
Yes.
or it can be very
Who
powerful.
heard of that?
Yeah,
How
exactly. And
often do you hear about that?
you
Yes.
just don't. And then from there, I got into, there's another book, African Americans on the Western Frontier. Oops, let me hold a little higher.
Yes.
And then I got into some books. This is a pretty fun one. It's called Letters of a Woman Homesteader. The homesteading women, and as people at that time often were great letter writers. And so this particular woman, Eleanor Pruitt Stewart, was a white homesteading woman, but she wrote really extensively about her experiences on the plains, and it served as a nice way to just to get a sense of like the daily routine, the 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 level of hardship of it all, but
Mhm.
even more like the loneliness. That was the thing that I really
Lone
wanted to
woman.
get.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, because that level of isolation and the ways that that would make you really desperate for companionship of some kind, and even like just to survive, you need your neighbors. Which is how then Adelaide is our main characters, but then there are three other lone women. Because I realized like she just can't make it alone. That's the point. Like all these books are all about how nobody could make it alone.
Right. So just going back, following up on your research process. Part of what happens is when you're writing through your there's you writers are often in conversation with other writers.
Right.
So if you had to talk about who you'd be in conversation with in this book and your other books, who are the people who influenced you as a writer?
Oh, well, if we're spanning like the whole life of writing, then certainly, as I quoted Toni Morrison, so Toni Morrison would be there, Gloria Naylor would be there, Ishmael Reed would be there, particularly for like that wry sense of humor and the politics underneath it,
Mhm.
and the sort of speaking truth to power of it all. Then on the horror side, the writers I grew up on were Stephen King, Shirley Jackson, Clive Barker, Peter Straub. Um, and I mean, that's just a small sampling, but like in a way, my work is like those two kind of streams kind of pooling together. And then you also have to throw in comic books.
Right.
So
So part of what I really enjoy, you're a really very skilled writer. You care
thank
about
you.
craft. And talk to us about your writing process because there are many people who are writing now.
Mhm.
A lot of people think they can write and just want to know, and not that they can't, but there's a you have a respect for the craft.
Right.
Talk to us about what your writing day is like, what your writing process is like, and the importance of craft.
Well, so I will say, so the way I work, my wife is also a writer. We're different kinds of writers. We write different genres sometimes. She writes like more realist fiction, and then she writes nowadays more nonfiction. Um, but and then I write more speculative fiction and horror kind of stuff. But so we're different kinds of writers in that my wife is she's a slow and methodical writer, meaning that like in a day she might get through one paragraph of her writing, but she will have gone back. She'll write the paragraph out, and then she'll say, did that really get across what I was trying to get across? And she'll read it through again. She'll say, no, no, no. And she has to rewrite every sentence in that paragraph. And then she has to go over it again. And she basically works that paragraph over and over and over, making sure she's not repeating words just to repeat words, making sure she's using the exact right word
Right.
for each thing. And so for her, her books, there might be two drafts of her book, but that's not actually true because like every paragraph has been worked over
He's
four or
worked it
five
through,
times.
right?
Yes.
To get
Whereas
to that point,
to
right?
get to that, so a lot of times when she hands over a book, it looks like you're like, I think this is done. And she'll say, no, not quite, but it feels so polished. Whereas for me, I'm more of a like speed through it kind of writer. But as a result, what that means is most of my books go through 5, 10, 12 drafts.
Okay.
Um, so I'm writing the whole thing out in a burst, just because a lot of times my stories have a lot of plots going on, a lot of strange things going on. In a weird way, I need to just figure out like, and then what? And then what? And wait a second, this, okay. And we just keep going and going and going until we get to the end. And then after I have the whole first draft, let's say the first draft is usually a quarter to half as long as the full one. So if this one's 300 pages, the original first draft was probably 450 pages. And then in the next draft, I go back to the beginning and I start editing it, and I just start cutting out everything that bores me. Every scene.
That's an interesting
Well, because
technique. Everything that bores you.
only because I feel like if I don't even find me interesting, I know you're not going to find it interesting.
Right.
And so I have to be very hard on myself and say, like, do I need this much? Or I'll cut out, if the scene is 10 pages, when I read through that draft, it might end up being 4 pages because I didn't need everything, you know. And then it's a little obsessive, but so after I do that, the 450-page manuscript has shrunk down to about 300 pages. And now each new draft that I revise, I'm revising. One time I'm reading through just to see, am I using the best language? Like, does it sound interesting? Am I using good phrasing? Does it sound like me? Right? Because even though it's a book about the past, I still want it to sound like I'm telling the story. So my sense of humor is coming through, my rhythm of conversation and all the rest. All that has to come through. And then after I do that, then I do a draft where I just look at the characters. Are they as interesting as they can be? Are they surprising? Can you picture them? Have I described them well enough for you to picture them? And so in that way, I go through about 8 or 10 different craft elements: the plot, the characters, the themes, the language, all of this, to try to make it as tight as possible. And after I've done all of that over the course of a year, 2 years, one time it was 7 years.
Wow.
Then I give it to my wife and to my agent and to my editor. And then that's when we really get down to work. And it'll still be another year of editing with them.
Amazing. And how long was this book? How long did this take?
This one was shorter. I think I started it in 2020 or maybe 2019. So I think it was about 3 years, which
Okay.
is, for me, is one of the faster times for me.
Right.
2-3 years is about the normal.
That speaks to why, as I said, your writing is just really so skillful, and you can tell that you care about the craft. So
I
when you
appreciate
look at what's happening in Black literature today, or the literature by Black writers and speculative fiction,
Mhm.
do you think that is this a genre that's going to last? Are we just in a moment of time where people are just wanting to escape climate
Right.
control and
Right.
disaster and COVID? I mean, where do you see it going?
Well, that certainly doesn't hurt. I can't remember. I think it was the filmmaker John Carpenter, maybe, who said that horror does its best under conservative presidents, under Republican presidents, or in times of disaster. Like, those are the times when horror thrives, because people are anxious and scared, and the horror books or speculative fiction books, whatever we want to call, they get to speak to that moment, right? Like, but what I know as a kid who's been reading, particularly, let's say, horror, but also speculative fiction since I was a teenager, right? What I know and appreciate is that there's always writers writing it, right? Like Tananarive, who now is thriving and doing amazingly well. I think she talks about, like, her first couple books. There was some audience, but nowhere near the kind of audience that exists now for it. And it wasn't just that she got better, certainly, but it was also almost like the planet of reader interest sort of revolved back around again to where a larger population was interested in what she was doing and was able to say, "Oh, we love what your stuff is." Someday, certainly, it will spin away again, right? And my hope is that maybe it spins in a way that suddenly gives support to, say, Black historical writers, or dare I say, Black poets, or whoever, like that. as long as there's reader interest and it's moving around this sort of global understanding of Black literature in the diaspora, um, I I feel like as long as people are still reading, it's okay if it's not always us, right? Even though right now, like, the dream would be we get in we get into a place in this country where things seem relatively safe, and we're actually tackling climate change in some sort of way, and we're not resorting to incarceration for large portions of our Black and brown populations and all the rest. And people relax a little bit, and all of a sudden, rom-com writers are doing great because now people want to just celebrate and be happy.
Yeah.
And I'll be happy for those writers to get their due too.
Right. Well, I think it's, as I said, I think it's here for a bit.
Yeah,
And,
unfortunately. I
yeah,
mean, fortunately and unfortunately.
right. So as we come to a close, what message do you give to aspiring writers?
Well, as you said, like I do take the craft of writing real seriously, and I remember the one of my college professors, when I would say like I want to write, the first question that he asked was, well, what do you read? And without question, you cannot be a good writer if you are not a good reader. I'm not telling you what it has to be. You can read anything you want in the world. I grew up reading comic books. That was my first reading love. Lots of people think that's not real reading. I definitely think it is. So whatever it is you love, whatever kind of reading you love, you just have to be sure you are actually reading that work. And I'm talking about not just the work that exists, that's published right now, but like the work, whatever writer you read now that you love, there's probably an interview where they talk about the writer they read when they were young, and then you should go back and read them, and then read an interview with that writer, and they'll tell you who they loved. And if you can kind of do that and read back into that history, then you can figure out the way that you fit in as the next generation of that writing.
Wow, what a powerful message,
Yeah.
to go back and trace the trajectory. And,
Find your
one of
people.
the things I wrote, I told you I did a review of Lone Women, but I wrote, one of the things I love about it is, again, it is expanding the canon.
Yes.
It's breaking, it's breaking the barriers against the fact that you did not have Black people in the Old West, and
That's
women.
right.
It
And
is
women
celebrating
specifically.
strong and powerful women.
Yes.
I thank you so much for writing this. I really enjoyed it. I kept at it, read it very quickly, and
I
marked
really
it up. I always mark up my books. And I want to encourage our listening audience and our viewing audience to purchase Lone Women by Victor LaValle. And remember, the writer is always reading. The reader is always writing. Keep reading and writing, and empower yourselves as readers and writers. We've been talking with Victor LaValle, prolific writer. And please come back next week. This radio show is paid for by Medgar Evers College. And this is Dr. Brenda Greene signing off. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Dr. Greene.
Okay.